Salvete discipuli. Today we're going to begin our discussion of the Punic Wars, and specifically we're going to discuss the first of the Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage. And the Punic Wars that happened in the middle of the Republic truly is one of the major events that shaped history to come in the area around the Mediterranean. Before we actually begin talking about the First Punic War, the Romans, by way of the epic poet Virgil, offer an explanation as to the eternal hatred of Rome for Carthage and of Carthage for Rome. And he explains it due to the founding of Rome. Prior to the founding of Rome, Queen Dido, a Phoenician originally from the city of Tyre, founded Carthage after her uncle assumed the throne and attempted to assassinate her. In addition to that, Aeneas flees the Trojan War, eventually finding his way to the city of Carthage right after Dido founds it, and Dido there gives him aid. They become romantically entangled, but when Aeneas leaves to continue on with his fate of founding the Roman city, Dido kills herself. And as Aeneas is leaving, she curses the entire line of all men who would eventually come from Aeneas, which includes all future Romans. And as an explanation for why we call these the Punic Wars as opposed to the Roman Carthaginian Wars, all of this comes from the fact that Queen Dido was originally a Phoenician. The Latin name for Phoenician was the Punici, and once we take into account that Latin word, we've just transferred that straight into the English. And so the Punic Wars are really the Phoenician Wars between Rome and Carthage. We do have a slight issue with the chronology according to Virgil as he's trying to explain the eons of hatred between Rome and Carthage, and that's if we take into account the archaeology. Carthage, from an archaeological standpoint, was founded sometime around 814 BCE. And Aeneas, we know from the story in Virgil, comes to Carthage just after it's founded. However, Aeneas is fleeing from Troy when it's being destroyed, and archaeologically we found the level of Troy, Troy 7a, which was destroyed 1180 BCE. If we do the math disciply, I find it hard to believe that Aeneas is 408 years old when he and Queen Dido become romantically entangled. All of the chronology aside, let's continue on into the First Punic War. Prior to the First Punic War, Rome is truly only a land power. They do have some ships, but for the most part, they're for trade by sea up and down the Tiber River or right along the coast down into the Naples Bay area and the area of Pompeii and Mount Vesuvius. For the most part, the Romans were incapable of traveling across open water, apart from short reaches, such as in between the Italian boot and the island of Sicily. Greece and Carthage were the other two main superpowers. Here you can see the areas of Sicily that are Carthaginian controlled, and in the green we have Syracuse, which is a Greek city-state. Both of these powers are major trading centers, and as Rome is expanding and becoming a major trading power itself, Rome wants to take over its portion of Sicily because Sicily, since it is in the heart of the Mediterranean, is really one of the trading hotspots in the Mediterranean Sea area. And so in 264 BCE, Rome decided to expand off of the peninsula and expand its trading empire onto Sicily, and they attacked the Carthaginians who were in control of Sicily. Now, when I say that Rome decided to attack the Carthaginians, the story is a bit more humorous than that. In essence, we have a group of independent mercenaries who take control of a city in Sicily. They then find it difficult to govern said city, and first they appeal to Carthage, saying, "Please, Carthage, won't you help us control our city?" Carthage responds in the positive, and they send troops over to help govern the new city that the mercenaries took control of. Well, then the mercenaries decided, I don't like this rule by the Carthaginians. Hey, Rome, will you help get rid of our Carthaginian oppressors? And Rome, who has this eternal hatred for Carthage, responded in the positive and decided to send troops to the Carthaginian-controlled city. In essence, the First Punic War is caused by a group of mercenaries who took control of a city and then decided it was too tough to govern. All in all, though, 264 marks in the beginning of the First Punic War, 264 to 241, an over 20-year period of fighting between the Romans and the Carthaginians. Hamilcar Barca is the name of the Carthaginian general who first led forces onto the island of Sicily, and his particular military genius was for sea battles. He was a competent general on land as well, but he was primarily gifted for sea and naval battles. Unfortunately, Rome didn't have a very good navy. Like I said, their ships were primarily designed for travel on rivers. Carthage, on the other hand, had a superb navy, which meant that the Romans needed to do something to mitigate the Carthaginian sea power and expertise. What they eventually decided to do was invent something called the corvus. Literally, it means a crow, but a more common translation of it would be a gangplank. And what would happen is the Roman ships would sail with the corvus raised. As they would come alongside a Carthaginian ship, the corvus would drop down, and then the spike would center into the ship to keep the two ships attached. Once the gangplank, the corvus, was down and attached to the Carthaginian ships, Roman soldiers would be able to use it to cross onto the Carthaginian ships, swords in hand, and therefore turn a sea battle into a land battle, and the land battle being the particular strength of the Romans at this time. So the corvus not only allowed the Romans to use their own particular expertise, but it took away the biggest advantage that the Carthaginians had, their expertise in sea battles. In the end, after over 20 years of fighting, Rome eventually emerged victorious in 241 BCE. As part of the peace treaties, Rome got control of all of Sicily and then all of the islands between Sicily and the northern coast of Africa to act as buffers between Sicily and the Carthaginian Empire here on the northern tip of Tunisia. In addition to that, Carthage had to pay a ridiculously large indemnity fee in order to cover the costs of the war. In total, it was over 3,200 talents of silver paid over the course of 10 years. And 1 talent of silver approximately weighs 57 pounds. When you combine that with what silver's current price on the market is, we're talking about Carthage paying over $46 million to Rome over the course of 10 years. And at the end of this war, Hamilcar was of course recalled to Carthage as part of the peace treaty terms. Now, one important thing to note about the Carthaginian army, unlike Rome, which had a standing army, the Carthaginians primarily relied on mercenary soldiers. Since they had to pay 3,200 talents of silver to Rome over the course of 10 years, they were unable to pay their mercenary soldiers. These soldiers had already fought and died for Carthage in the First Punic Wars, and this of course led to major revolt in northern Africa. This revolt of the mercenary soldiers eventually led to the island of Sardinia and the island of Corsica, Corsica being the smaller island, Sardinia being the larger island to the south, and Rome used this situation, the revolt of the mercenaries, in order to gain control of Sardinia and Corsica. The inability of Carthage to pay their mercenaries also eventually led to the Second Punic War, which we'll continue discussing in our next video as we explore the 3 Punic Wars between ancient Rome and ancient Carthage. Valete discipuli.